نرجع بنستأنف جلسات تعليقا على الديسكشن الطويلة والممتعة مع سيد علي جابر بفكرة مهضومة عن الانتاجات اللي كانت تقوم فيها داعش للريبورترز او للريبورتس اللي كانت تقوم فيهم. في احد الزملاء عنا بتعرف نحن بنشتغل بمؤسسات اعلاميه، والمؤسسات الاعلاميه بلبنان كانت مكتوبه او تلفزيونيه او اذاعيه كلها بتعاني من ازمه ماليه طاحنه. ففي مؤسسات بتقبض شهر، ما بتقبض شهرين، بصير في تاخيرات. بيجوا الشباب مره لعندي بيقولوا لي اذا بتعرف شي كونتاكت معهم الاتش ار تبعهم عم بياخذوا يشغلوا عندهم ريبورترز او مصورين او تكنيك، نحن موجودين بنروح على الرقه، بنروح وين ما كان، بس اذا بيقبضوا بيدفعوا لنا على القد. نحن هو دكتورز ريبورترز كانوا يشتغلوا معنا وتقنيين بالتلفزيونات، بتعرف التلفزيونات وضعهم اليوم او الجرايد كمان، فالعديد منهم كانوا اضبط ماديا، بس بوقت الحالي عم بيجربوا يشوفوا اذا في اتش ار عند داعش تيشتغلوا كرمال الريبورتاجات، تيقدموا السيفيات تبعولهم. كانوا خاصة عم بيصوروا كانوا 5 دي، يعني طريقة التصوير تبعهم كانت ممتعة. رح نتابع ونستأنف هالمؤتمر. اهلا وسهلا فيكم مرة جديدة. بيشهد عالم الصحافة طبعا وحرية التعبير تراجع كبير وخطر لمناقشة، طبعا خطر دائم هذا القطاع، لمناقشة هالأزمة هالمسألة اللي بندعي إلى المنصة السيدة بربرة تريومفي، المديرة التنفيذية للمؤسسة الدولية للصحافة The Executive Director of the International Press Institute، اللي رح تحدثنا عن الحملة القائمة بهدف إطلاق سراح 170 صحافي محتجز بتركيا. طبعا بعد الأزمة اللي طرأت على تركيا بالسنوات الماضية وقمع حرية الصحافة، بنعرف قديش في رؤساء تحرير وفي عدد من المسؤولين الإعلاميين محتجزين حتى اليوم، وهنالك نداءات لإطلاق سراحهم. المنصة للسيدة بربرة تريومفي. Barbara. Oh, hello. How are you?
Very
Good.
well.
It's for you, please.
Thank you. It's true. And my voice is different too. There is a mobile phone here if you need it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good afternoon. And first of all, let me apologize for this beautiful voice I have today. I'm so sorry. I hope you can hear me nevertheless. And I hope you can understand me. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear May, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you about press freedom today and about the media challenges and the defense of quality journalism around the world. Promoting press freedom and quality journalism is what IPI, the International Press Institute, which I represent here today, is all about. We are a global network of editors, leading journalists and media executives who have joined together under a common set of values and about the belief and under the belief that quality, public interest journalism cannot exist without press freedom. And that real democracies, and not those democracies funded on undemocratic institutions that we see popping up these days, but democracies based on pluralism, on trust, on accountability, cannot exist without quality journalism. And I'm so glad that the speaker before lunch already stressed these principles so that you see that they can indeed be applied in practice. Defending press freedom and promoting good journalism is what IPI has been doing for almost 70 years. IPI was founded in 1950 when the world was just emerging after 2 world wars and a period of profound crisis in between. And the general feeling was that the media had failed of its essential purpose and had allowed to be abused by the powers that were, and to push for an agenda that was not in the public interest. The media was pushing for a propaganda for war, for discriminatory policies, and for committing atrocities that violated human dignities. And the 35 editors who came together, international editors who came together to fund IPI, they wanted change from that reality. They wanted a media that is not a propaganda tool, but that can report accurately and fairly and has public interest as ultimate goal. And in order to be able to achieve that goal, they said press freedom must be respected. Today, IPI has grown into an organization with over 800 members around the world, editors, journalists, people dedicated to good journalism and press freedom. And they gather every year at the IPI World Congress to discuss all the new challenges to press freedom, to independent journalism, and how they can, either individually or jointly, protect the journalism they believe in. And I was asked today not only to present IPI's campaign to free the journalists in Turkey, but also to identify briefly the major challenges to press freedom and the media independence around the world, and to talk briefly about how IPI is fighting to address them. When I joined IPI 17 years ago, the world looked different than today. Ever since I joined IPI, I've been traveling around the world to discuss specific restrictions to press freedom and discuss with our members in the regions and in the countries possible solutions. The strengths of the solutions that IPI proposed has always been given, on one hand, by the fact that IPI has been around for so long. So we have institutional experience, we know what worked where. On the other hand, on the fact that we operate with the support of the media community, of the news media community. And the news media community has traditionally also enjoyed the support of the people, of their audiences. So for many years, it felt, probably after the end of the Cold War, it felt as if we knew the recipe for press freedom. We knew that a good combination of strong self-regulatory and accountability mechanisms developed by the news industry, matched by the existence of a proper legal framework, an independent public institution that would be able to shield the media from interferences from governments, political parties, and anybody who wants to restrain them. We knew this is what brings press freedom, and this is what brings about the democracies we want to live in. So the ideal, the progressive idea, if you want, of benevolent states that guarantee pluralism and open spaces for public debate needed to be combined with the liberal ideal of free speech, so that, as in John Milton's doctrine, if truth and falsehood can be freely debated, eventually truth will emerge. And for many years we felt that not only we had the recipe for press freedom, but also that the world was moving in that direction, slowly, because transitions take time, but the world was going in that direction. However, this has changed in the past couple of years, maybe, as political and economic crises have strengthened populisms, and digital technologies and social media have shown their huge democratic but also disruptive potential. And nowhere more than here in the Middle East have we seen how digital technology and social media have the potential to change socio-political realities. They offer young people tired of the stagnation and the corruption of the elites a cheap and effective way to voice their frustrations. But at the same time, and this is the problem, digital technologies also fragment the public sphere. And because we allow algorithms based on alleged preferences that we express to separate us in our own ecosystems, rather than encouraging us to participate in a shared public space where truth and falsehood, or in today's words, where facts and propaganda can be freely discussed and facts will emerge. What has been called algorithmic segregations by some observers is what prevents the debate between truth and falsehood and allows facts and propaganda to coexist in completely separate spaces, in the dangerous perception that both indeed are legitimate interpretation of this reality. And this generates confusions among audiences. In particular, it gives birth to two dangerous misperceptions. The first one, which emerged primarily as a consequence of social media use, is that journalism equals free expression. Somebody mentioned this before. Journalism is not pure. Journalism is not unrestrained free expression. Journalism works within a framework of values, generally defined as journalistic codes of ethics or codes of good practices, and has a public purpose. And the second misperception, which is promoted by populistic leaders around the world, is the fact that facts emerging from accurate journalistic investigations are not absolute, but only one of many possible interpretations of reality. What President Trump does when he calls the New York Times or the Washington Post fake news is giving the impression that what I call journalism is fake news for you, and what you call journalism is fake news for me. But presenting journalistic accuracy and accountability as subjective kills the very foundation of journalism, which is based on the belief that we can indeed present facts with a very small margin of error. And this is a huge problem of journalism today, is the lack of trust and the lack of broad support by the people, which cripples journalism beyond the damages already caused by an economic crisis within the industry. And this weakness certainly has also allowed undemocratic leaders to implement old and new ways to clamp down on independent, critical journalism, creating an increasingly restrictive climate for news media around the world. And this is what IPI has been observing. Whether we look at Europe, around Europe, the situation is absolutely terrible. The Middle East, South Asia, North America, we see the very foundation of journalism being eroded, and leaders coming in and bringing restrictions with the support of the people, with the support of the voters. But let's look at some of the main trends that IPI has observed recently as part of this decline. I will mention 3 of them. The first one are physical attacks against journalists that cannot be ignored, and they remain a serious problem, as these attacks are direct consequences of the impunity that perpetrators of crimes against journalists enjoy. Still today, after huge campaigns promoted by UNESCO, by NGOs around the world, by international organizations, impunity is a reality in over 90% of the attacks against journalists. And this encourages perpetrators to continue these attacks. However, while the IPI Death Watch shows a possible decline in the number of journalists killed this year compared to previous years, we still see that some countries like Mexico or the Philippines, countries where typically journalism is a terribly dangerous profession, although on the other hand, there are countries that do have a very good degree of freedom. And in these countries, the number of journalists journalists continue to grow. And we register also many other physical attacks on journalists. Secondly, there is an increase in efforts to criminalize legitimate journalism. There is a set of laws which are typically used beyond their legitimate scope in order to silence critical journalism. I'm thinking about anti-terrorism laws, criminal libel laws, blasphemy laws, national security laws, and even cybercrime laws, all laws that do belong in democracies, but then they should not be used to silence those who observe and report on the reality. And yet, these are the laws under which many of our colleagues are being held in prison, or that are used to induce self-censorship. And thirdly, I also wanted to mention what is a relatively new trend that IPI has been analyzing for a couple of years, which is the phenomenon of digital attacks against journalists. Journalists receive large numbers of threatening, insulting messages, often generated by trolls, and disseminated through social media primarily, but also online news fora. And while the number of journalists, our research, we've been carrying out this research in many very different countries, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe to South Asia, South America. The number of journalists affected by this problem is very large. It's incredibly large in very diverse types of societies. There is still very little awareness about this, and there is very little awareness about how these types of attacks influence journalism. On one hand, they generate fear. So the journalists we have been speaking to, they operate in fear. They're terrorized about covering certain topics. So self-censorship is the answer. On the other hand, They challenge the credibility of the journalists because these insulting messages, they take place on public spaces, on social media. So they're read not only by the targeted journalists, but also by their audiences. And they undermine their credibility with their audiences. Let me, if I may, show you a short video that we have produced about this with the OSCE, a Vienna-based international governmental organization, to raise awareness about these topics as part of one of the many projects we are working on in this direction. Please.
I'm intimidated by something that's surreal, that's online, and yet it's done by real people who are doing this to make sure that I feel physically punished.
Maybe he's, you know, like looking at me right now or going behind my back.
Elevator doors, it's opened, and I saw that they are coming down. And in that moment, I said that it's over.
Ultimately, learned to protect myself with firearms so that when I went out in public, I would be able to protect myself.
Thank you. What this video shows is that, and we're working on a documentary on this for the OSCE and a number of other awareness-raising tools. But what it shows is that, and what is also proven by our statistics, is that about over 70% of the attacks that take place online are very vicious and they target women. And the big part of the remaining attacks, they target members of minority groups. So clearly they target those journalists who are perceived as weaker in society. That's why they are vicious. What this video also tries to show is that the women who are targeted by these attacks, they don't know whether these attacks will remain online, because in some cases they have translated into real attack. Daphne, who was killed just a few weeks ago, she received numerous threats before being killed. So unfortunately, sometimes they do translate into actual attacks that cannot be ignored. So what does IPI do to counter such immense pressure on free journalism, and how is this unique? The unique strength of the IPI advocacy is that it can count on the direct support of its members, who represent some of the most respected news outlets around the world and some of the most respected journalists around the world. IPI operates both at the international level, gathering international pressure, as well as at the local level, where those violations occur. And for this, IPI's advocacy is more difficult to be ignored by governments. Governments tend to respond to local pressure, in particular if it is backed by international pressure. This solidarity within the IPI community of members and beyond is our strongest weapon. The belief that an attack on one journalist is an attack on all of them, and is an attack on our system of values, on the universality of our values, which is proven by the fact that IPI members come from over 100 countries across the globe. And for those journalists who are under pressure, imprisoned, prevented from working, their news outlets shut down, their families threatened, knowing that there is a community out there ready to stand up for them, gives them a strong sense that they are not alone in the struggle, and that gives power, the power to go on. Some years ago, in 2012, when Nedim Şener, a Turkish journalist who had been in prison for investigating the unpunished murder of journalist Hrant Dink, when Nedim Şener was released from prison after a full year in prison, during which IPI members had reportedly called for his freedom, he wrote an open letter to thank IPI. And talking about the time in prison, Şener said, "During those hard days, my staying power was my loyalty to the truth. The International Press Institute, which recognized my loyalty and supported me from the very moment I was arrested to the day I was released from prison, was my greatest power." Last year, IPI awarded Ahmad Zaidabadi, an Iranian journalist who had been recently released after 6 years in prison, but is still on a lifetime ban from practicing journalism and traveling. When IPI informed Zaidabadi about the award, he sent us a letter to be read at the IPI World Congress, where the award was being given in his absence because he was forbidden from traveling. Reflecting on his current circumstances, Zaidabadi said, "It seems that I am condemned to become a stranger in my own country and have my mouth shut. In such a condition, sometimes I think I have been condemned to civil execution or to go through a silent death and be forgotten altogether. But when suddenly it is announced that an international organization such as IPI selects you as their World Press Freedom Hero, and when you find out that throughout the world, your journalist colleagues and other organizations remember that you existed and once used to write and offer analysis, this gives you hope that one day you will again be able to write." More recently, the IPI community has come together following the imprisonment of 3 IPI members in Turkey, including our executive board member, Kadri Gürsel. They are among over 170 journalists imprisoned in Turkey in the clampdown on the clampdown on the press that followed the attempted coup in Turkey in July 2016. Since the day our journalists and their colleagues were brought to prison, and until this very moment, IPI members have written letters to them in prison, which we have published. They have written articles and published them in their own newspapers around the world. They have made video statements disseminated online and on social media. They have met personally with Turkey's ambassadors around the world, traveled to Istanbul to make public statements in front of court where the journalists were being tried. And it was the closely coordinated action of the IPI headquarters in Vienna, together with its members in Turkey and the international community, that made the IPI Free Turkey Journalists campaign so powerful. Again, let me show you a short video about it.
This is an attack on all of us. This is an attack on the freedom of speech, on the freedom of press. We have to end this.
Call on the Turkish government and the authorities in Turkey to release Kadri Gürsel and the other 14 journalists.
Kadri is an outstanding journalist and a columnist, and he should be outside of prison writing and not being in prison.
The immediate release of our members and all other journalists currently in prison in Turkey as a consequence of their profession.
Every journalist should be free to express his opinion on the media he works for and not from a prison cell.
Thank you. Kadri Gösel, IPI Executive Board member, was eventually released less than a month ago. In a letter to IPI members, when he went out of prison, he wrote, "I'm finally released from jail after having been kept captive for 11 months. It's great to join again the camaraderie of global defenders of press freedom. Typing this letter to reach you directly is a wonderful feeling. Particularly you, IPI members, you have shown to the enemies of media freedom that they can't get away with jailing journalists. You've shown that this has a moral and a political cost at an international level. I'm proud to be one of you." And before showing you one final video and getting down from this stage, I would like to invite you to join me in honoring a woman who is possibly one of the most courageous, resolute of our members, IPI World Press Freedom hero, Dr. May Chidiak. Thank you so much. We are so proud to have you. I'll leave you with a last video. Thank you very much, and shukran.
The issue of the freedom of the press is still something that we have to fight for.
The reason you're my first stop is that, as you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth.
I think we need IPI more than ever because
we work to get journalists out of jail.
We believe that for our members, the most important thing is their right to live and work without fear. And in the end, their ability to do so is essential for democratic and stable and accountable societies.
And then we also told them, look, you're not here fighting alone. The world is with you.
One of the major benefits for me as a CEO has been the opportunity to network with people in the media fraternity.
My involvement with the IPI has been one of the great privileges of my life.